Welcome to our continuing series, Questions and Answers for a World in Crisis. The Psychic Being, Part 6. All answers are from the writings of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. The Mother. You must always distrust people who go rambling in some kind of mental or vital domain, and then tell you stories imagining that they remember their past lives. You know the classical example of that well-known lady who narrated her lives from the time she had been a monkey. I may assure you that it is pure imagination, for it is impossible to remember like that. This is what happens. Let us take a divine spark which, through attraction, through affinity and selection, gathers around it a being of psychic consciousness. This work is already very perceptible in animals. Don't think you are exceptional beings, that you alone have a psychic being, and the rest of creation hasn't. It begins in the mineral. It is a little more developed in the plant, and in the animal, there is a first glimmer of the psychic presence. Then there comes a moment when this psychic being is sufficiently developed to have an independent consciousness and a personal will. And then, after innumerable lives, more or less individualized, it becomes conscious of itself, of its movements, and of the environment it has chosen for its growth. Arriving at a certain state of perception, it decides, generally at the last minute of the life it has just finished upon earth, the conditions in which its next life will be passed. Here I must tell you a very important thing. The psychic being can progress and form itself only in the physical life and upon earth. As soon as it leaves a body, it enters into a rest, which lasts for a more or less long time, according to its own choice and its degree of development. A rest for assimilation, for a passive progress, so to say. A rest for passive growth, which will allow this same psychic being to pass on to new experiences and make a more active progress. But after having finished one life, which usually ends only when it has done what it wanted to do, it will have chosen the environment where it will be born, the approximate place where it will be born, the conditions and the kind of life in which it will be born, and a very precise program of the experiences through which it will have to pass to be able to make the progress it wants to make. I am going to give you quite a concrete example. Let us take a psychic being that has decided, for some reason or other, to enter the body of a being destined to become king, because there is a whole series of experiences it can have only under those conditions. And having passed through these experiences of a king, it finds that there is a whole domain in which it cannot make a progress due to these very conditions of life where it is. So when it has finished its term upon earth and decides to go away, it decides that in its next life it will take birth in an ordinary environment and in ordinary conditions, neither high nor low, but such that the body which it will take up will be free to do what it likes. For I do not tell you anything new when I say that the life of a king is the life of a slave. A king is obliged to submit to a whole protocol and to all kinds of ceremonies to keep his prestige. It is perhaps very pleasant for vain people, but for a psychic being it is not pleasant, for this deprives it of the possibility of a large number of experiences. So, having taken this decision, it carries in itself all the memories which a royal life can give it, and it takes rest for the period it considers necessary. Here, I must say that I am speaking of a psychic being exclusively occupied with itself, not one consecrated to a work, because in that case, it is the work which decides the future lives and their conditions. I am speaking of a psychic being at work completing its development. Hence, it decides that at a certain moment it will take a body. Having already had a number of experiences, it knows that in a certain country, a certain part of the consciousness has developed. In another part, and so on. So it chooses the place which offers it easy possibilities of development, the country, the conditions of living, the approximate nature of the parents, and also the condition of the body itself, its physical structure, and the qualities it needs for its experiences. It takes rest, then, at the required moment, wakes up and projects its consciousness upon earth, centralizing it in the chosen domain and the chosen conditions, or almost so. There is a small margin, for in the psychic consciousness, one is too far away from the material physical consciousness to be able to see with a clear vision. It is an approximation. It does not make a mistake about the country or the environment, and it sees quite clearly the inner vibrations of the people chosen. But there may happen to be a slight indecision. But if, just at this moment, there is a couple upon earth, or rather a woman, who has a psychic aspiration herself, and, for some reason or other, without knowing why or how, would like to have an exceptional child, answering certain exceptional conditions. If at this moment there is this aspiration upon earth, it creates a vibration, a psychic light, which the psychic being sees immediately and without hesitation, it rushes towards it. Then, from that moment, which is the moment of conception, it watches over the formation of the child, so that this formation may be as favorable as possible to the plan it has. Consequently, its influence is there over the child even before it appears in the physical world. If all goes well, if there is no accident, accidents can always happen. If all goes well at the moment the child is about to be born, the psychic force, perhaps not in its totality, but a part of the psychic consciousness, rushes into the being, and from its very first cry gives it a push towards the experiences it wants the child to acquire. The result is that even if the parents are not conscious, even if the child is in its external consciousness, it is not quite conscious. A little child does not have the necessary brain for that. It forms slowly, little by little. In spite of that, it will be possible for the psychic influence to direct all the events, all the circumstances of the life of this child, till the moment it becomes capable of coming into conscious contact with its psychic being. Physically, it is generally between the age of 4 and 7, sometimes sooner, sometimes almost immediately. But in such a case, we deal with children who are not children, who have supernatural qualities, as they say. They are not supernatural, but simply the expression of the presence of the psychic being. But there are people who have not had the chance, or rather the good fortune, if one may call it that, of meeting someone physically who could instruct them. And yet they have the feeling that every step of their existence, every circumstance of their life is arranged by someone conscious, so that they may make the maximum progress. When they need a certain circumstance, it comes. When they need to meet certain people, they come. When they need to read certain books, they find them within their reach. Everything is arranged like that, as if someone was watching over them, so that their life may have the maximum possibilities of development. These people may very well say, "But what is a psychic being?" For no one has ever used these words in speaking to them, or they have not found anybody who could explain to them all that. But for them, often just one meeting is sufficient, just one look in order to wake up. One word suffices to make them remember, "But I knew all that." This is exactly what happens to a psychic being which has reached the last stage of its development. After that, it will no longer be bound by the necessity of coming upon earth. It will have completed its development and will be able to choose freely either to consecrate itself to the divine work or go elsewhere, that is, in the higher worlds. But generally, having come to this stage, it remembers all that has happened to it and understands the great necessity of coming to the help of those who are yet struggling in the midst of difficulties. These psychic beings give their whole existence to the divine work. This is not absolute, inevitable. They choose freely, but 90 times out of 100, this is what they do. But in ordinary lives, and by that I mean the life of a certain elite of sufficiently well-developed people, the contact between the external being and the psychic is quite intermittent. It is the result of certain experiences or certain inner needs. At that moment, the psychic being is in front, as Sri Aurobindo says. That is, it comes to the surface of the consciousness. It is in direct contact with material circumstances, with forms and words and sounds, etc., for a very short time. So it records all that like a photograph or a cinema, but it is just a minute, a few moments in a lifetime. These moments may repeat themselves several times, but they do not last. And it is this the psychic being remembers. And when you have real psychic memories, sincere, spontaneous, not fabricated by the mind or the vital, that is, purely psychic, exact, your memory is intermittent. And it is often very difficult to locate your past lives, to say, I was this or that. It is only when the psychic experience has taken place at a very important moment of your life, and a whole set of circumstances gives you, so to say, the key to the story, dresses, spoken words, customs, or an environment giving you the key, that you can say, oh, that life, I have lived it. But if someone comes and narrates to you all his previous lives, from the monkey onwards, with a mass of details, you may be sure that he is a humbug. Namaste.